This is the Cardiff Business School podcast, where we explore the power of public value in everything that we do. My name is Peter Wells. I am the Pro Dean of Public Value and also the host of the podcast series. My guest today is Professor Jill Atkins. Jill is, at least nominally, a professor of accounting. We will explore in reality what that means in the course of this podcast. But her work has taken her into really innovative and interesting areas of research involved in trying to understand and account for issues like species loss and habitat diversity loss and the environmental challenges that we face in the world today. Jill, welcome.
Hello.
You were with us before in Cardiff Business School a few years ago. You left, and now you've come back.
Yes, I'm very fortunate to have been asked to come back. So,
what inspired you to come back?
I suppose overall, the place is very friendly. I loved working here before. I moved for lots of different reasons, promotion, different opportunities, but I wanted to come back. I hoped to come back within 10 years, and it took 14. So,
that's not bad.
It's a lovely place to work,
Yes.
I think. It's collegiate. I like the buildings, I like the space, I like Cardiff as well. But it's a great place to work. I mean, I'm not just saying that because we're doing a video, that is the reason. And I hope not to leave again.
Yes. Yes, yeah. and of course you have a lot of like-minded colleagues around you, which you have managed to corral into a new research centre. I wonder if you could explain a bit about what that research centre is and what you hope to do with it.
Yes, okay. So there is the Interdisciplinary Perspectives Accounting Research Group, and I think the focus of that is very much on the EDI area, sort of social aspects in accounting. And my area very much is in environmental issues, particularly ecological issues. And I felt that it was important from the public value perspective to somehow showcase the work that's been done across the school in environmental issues particularly, so climate change, and particularly my area, which is biodiversity and nature. So it's actually a centre we set up online during the pandemic.
Oh, okay.
So I think it was, going back to 2020, early 2020, we set up a series of online seminars for extinction accounting.
Right.
And people all over the world presented papers, and that was a great success. And we called it the EAGR Group, Extinction Accounting Governance Research. And when I came here, I thought it would be really lovely to give it a physical home. So we've now got a physical presence with that group and a conference every year and regular workshops. And it just really gives us a chance to highlight that area.
Yes, extinction accounting. You might need to explain to a wider audience exactly what that means.
Well, it's a concept which is a very simple framework. So it's a very simple framework. It doesn't involve any, heavy calculations or whatever. But it's a framework for any organisation to use to report on the activities that they're taking part in to prevent species extinctions, to protect biodiversity, to enhance ecosystems, basically. So any organisation is at risk from biodiversity loss because there is a massive extinction crisis going on at the moment, which I think now people are aware of. There's a massive crisis in biodiversity, which is all life on Earth, plants, species of animals, birds, fish, everything is threatened. And we've lost something like 70% of populations in the last 50 years.
That's amazing,
and
isn't it?
There are probably 2 million species at risk of extinction at the moment. Basically, if the biodiversity goes, we
go with it.
We are stuffed, yeah. And the best way to save the planet is for us to go, actually.
Yeah. It's a weird area because I read the New Scientist a lot. I'm a subscriber, right? And they talk about these things from time to time. And one of the things that popped up recently was this problem of species, because what's happened with increasing kind of genetic understanding in DNA is that in some cases, things that we thought were one species are in fact two.
Yeah.
So the numbers move for no good reason in that sense.
It is interesting. The work that I'm doing at the moment is on de-extinction and looking at accounting and finance of de-extinction, and there's all these projects going on around the world.
Yes,
too.
And there's a lot of work going, especially with DNA, people extracting DNA and trying to reintroduce the dodo.
It's quite scary. There's this company called Colossal. I don't know if you've heard of it in America. And they call themselves the first de-extinction company.
Oh, right.
And they've attracted millions and millions of pounds from private investors, and they are planning to bring the woolly mammoth back by
I have read about
2028.
that.
Yes.
I have read about it. But there's some doubt about whether that's actually achievable.
I mean, I've read everything about it. It looks like they can do it. I mean, it's not going to be exactly like the original one, but it's a sort of hybrid of various
Well, here's the
genomes,
funny
I think.
thing. You know, when I was a kid, there was a story about a woolly mammoth.
Yeah.
And the story went like this. The woolly mammoth was discovered locked in a glacier,
Right.
stuck in ice, in Siberia. And this completely freaked me out because I thought to myself, well, so one day this woolly mammoth was walking along and it started to snow a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it snowed a bit more. And then he ends up encased in ice.
Ice,
And
yeah.
after that, I was never comfortable with winter.
Well, it's a horrible thought, isn't it? Same with, dinosaurs that you find that drowned or, frozen or whatever. But, I mean, what they've done, they can't do dinosaurs because the DNA is too disrupted.
Right.
But with the woolly mammoth, they've managed to basically get the genes out of it, the DNA, and they're going to put it into an Asian elephant.
Right.
So they're going to make the Asian elephant like a woolly mammoth.
Yeah.
And then they're going to...
It'll be an Asian woolly mammoth.
That's right. So how do we bring that into finance? What's it got to do with accounting and finance, basically? And the cost to companies of biodiversity loss is absolutely massive, and the risks are massive from a financial perspective. The best example to think of is pollinators and bees.
Oh, okay.
And there's been, again, a massive decrease in pollinators and bees for all sorts of reasons, which I won't go into, but multi-factor reasons. And of course, that affects the agriculture industry significantly. No pollinators,
Right.
no fruit,
Yes.
no vegetables.
Yes.
And I think that's the way to key into the importance of species loss. And across the board, all sorts of ways that ecosystem collapse, ecosystem degeneration affects businesses.
Right. Interesting. Just to push a little bit, how does that translate to individual businesses? I can understand that it has a huge economic impact, but can an individual business take action that would help redress some of those issues for the business itself? Or do you advocate they take action for the bigger picture, for society as a whole?
Yes, there's two reasons really. From an accounting point of view, we have something now called double materiality. So that means that companies have to take account of risks which face them, which affect their supply chains, which affect their production, but they also have to discharge accountability for their impact on other things such as nature and biodiversity. So on those two counts, businesses need to report on what they're doing to affect biodiversity either positively or negatively. So yes, every organisation can and is actually generally trying to do something about biodiversity. One of the most famous frameworks, the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, that looks at how companies can assess the habitats affected by their operations and the species on those habitats which are endangered, and then report on how they are trying to minimise impacts on those species. So our extinction accounting framework is very much, look for the organisation to look at what species are affected on the habitats that they operate on. So, for example, a mining company, has habitats all over the world which is impacting through mining activity. Basically do an audit of those species and then record how they are trying to minimise impacts, the effects of those strategies, partnerships they might have with, say, the WWF, because a lot of that is happening.
So the organisations partnering with NGOs
Exactly.
to drive sort of change in their agendas.
Yeah.
Interesting, very interesting. You've brought along a prop, which is interesting because, for a start, it's a book, and in a way, academia, books, you would think the two go together, but in many respects, we do other things, and books have become almost a luxury item for us to produce. Can you show us what you've brought? Extinction, Governance, Finance and Accounting. Wow. Can you explain why you've brought this book?
Well, we've done a series of books, myself and my collaborators, and I think this probably is the one which contains all of the work. It brings everything together. And the subheading is Implementing a Species Protection Action Plan for the Financial Markets.
Right.
So the idea is to look at how to integrate species protection, biodiversity protection into every part of the financial markets from investment, investor engagement, to the way that banks lend, to pension funds, to every bit of our financial markets, and also into the accounting and governance frameworks. And most of this book, most of the chapters, are actually contributed by practitioners from the investment industry.
Yes.
Yeah. There's actually very little academic content, I would say.
Right.
So Hermes EOS, for example, Business for Nature, all sorts of organisations which are now developing to protect biodiversity through finance and accounting.
Right. And obviously you have a very kind of campaigning approach to these issues. Do you feel like you're making traction in this? Can you convey a sense of progress, or do you think you're fighting a losing battle, or what's going on here?
Well, to be honest, since the beginning of the pandemic, biodiversity has exploded across the financial markets. Now, the co-author, the co-editor of this, Martina McPherson, she's a head of ESG, which is environmental, social and governance at the Swiss Stock Exchange at the moment. She has worked in different parts of the industry, and we work together very much on lots of different biodiversity-related projects. She's actually also doing a PhD here with me at the moment. But that's
an interesting mix.
In human rights and accounting. But she's in investor engagement, so she's very much involved in the way that the big institutional investors engage with companies to get them to change their behaviour across all areas of sustainability. And one of those areas is biodiversity. So this whole book is devoted to what investors are doing, for example, what companies are doing, what accounting frameworks are doing on biodiversity protection. And it's massive.
Yes.
We would like to think, and we do think actually, without, we don't really have evidence as such, but we did an event at Investec Bank in 2019, just before the pandemic. We had about 100 bankers and finance people, and it was the beginning of this book project. So we explained to them why extinction of species was a financial risk. I did a whole day of basically explaining the connections between biodiversity and finance. And we believe that it did actually shift the markets a little bit.
How interesting.
Yeah.
I remember reading one time that if you looked at the biomass of mammals on land, approximately 30% is people. Most of the rest is animals for people. 4% was wild mammals. 4%. So this makes me wonder, if you looked at it in parallel to the situation with oil and fossil fuel emissions and so on, that there are some areas of activity, some areas of business that are clearly more important than others for any of these issues that we consider within public value. And in your case, is that also the story? I mean, would you, for example, look to target industries or companies that are particularly problematic, or are you working purely at the level of finance?
I suppose I personally don't target companies, but I'm presenting work which provides the impetus for businesses and investors to engage on these issues. And a lot of the work that we've done has been used. So, for example, the papers that underlie this book, the academic papers that we've produced, like Extinction Accounting, were used in setting up the Biological Diversity Protocol, which is a reporting framework which sits beside the Capitals Coalition Natural Capital Protocol. And that BD protocol is being used by companies around the world now for them to report on biodiversity.
So you must be generating a lot of data, if nothing else.
Yes, I suppose so. I mean, it's just a fascinating area. But of course, I was told as a previous institution that my research was niche. And of course, as I see it, it's actually about, the preservation of the world as we know it, the future of the human species.
Yes, a niche interest.
Yes, a niche interest.
Our continued survival. But also, I assume, perhaps bravely, but I assume that it also informs your teaching.
Absolutely, yes. So my area is corporate governance, and I do extinction governance within that module always. I do a couple of lectures on bee decline, how it translates into accounting, how biodiversity risk is important to governance structures. I mean, one of the things we propose in here is having an ecological value officer, for example, in multinationals, big companies, but certainly having somebody representing ecological interests within businesses. And also in, for example, executive remuneration. bringing,
Yes,
biodiversity into that.
Yes. Well, obviously having a focus for change is really important, and then having incentives for change is equally important. Are the students receptive to this sort of discussion?
Absolutely. I always find with every group there'll be a few who just are absolutely fascinated in it. Mm-hmm. There are always some who aren't interested.
Of course.
But generally, I find there are usually some. And generally with master's modules that I've done, somebody will do their dissertation on extinction accounting,
right,
and somebody will probably go on to do a PhD.
Right.
So we've just taken on a new PhD student who's actually got a scholarship for a PhD in extinction finance from September, which is really exciting. I
attended a presentation by, I think, one of your PhD students quite recently at our PhD conference. Yes. And it was indeed fascinating. And actually seemed to open up many avenues of potential research because we know so little. There seems so much to do. How do you propose to focus your time in the future?
Well, I'm setting up, hopefully, a new sustainable accounting module for September, which I think will be a channel for a lot of this work for the teaching and learning side.
Right.
But I have a number of PhD students, and hopefully with the EAGER group, the new research group, I'd like that to be a focus for bringing a lot of doctoral students in, because we don't have a lot. I think we've got 3 doing this type of research at the moment, but it'd be nice to get a critical mass.
Sure.
I would love to attract funding, some significant funding to make it more of a centre. And it's just the amount of work in actually putting together the funding applications. But that's something I'd like to try and do over the next year or so.
And you've obviously been really successful in terms of the international network you've already created. Do you plan to kind of extend that area of activity as well?
Very much. I think we have some really good collaboration now with the Macau Institute of Social Responsibility. So I'm working with them. That's quite a new collaboration. I'm also a visiting professor in Wits University in South Africa. Okay. So I have a lot of work that I do with the South Africans, but we don't have a lot of actual collaboration with Latin America. So we do have people in our network from Latin America who work in these sorts of areas. In fact, we've got a lady presenting in our online series in July, but we don't actually have any established collaboration. So, that would be something that would be worth investigating.
Yes. It's a lot to do.
There's always a lot to do, isn't there?
Thank you very much, Jill.
Okay.
It's been a really, really interesting discussion. Having just started to understand this area myself, and I've come across it very recently, I can see it's going to be a hugely important burgeoning area of activity in the future. So thank you very much.
Thanks for asking me.
This has been the Cardiff Business School podcast, where we explore the power of public value in everything we do. And today, we've been discussing with Professor Jill Atkins about the realm of extinction accounting. It's been a burgeoning area of research that Jill has been a pioneer in developing, not just here in the school, but on an international scale, and not just in academia, but across the financial world. It will be increasingly important as we progress into the future, because without that biodiversity, without that species diversity, we have no future. Thank you very much.